Elizabeth, welcome so much to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm super stoked to be here.
I was just saying before we hopped on, it's crazy how I keep coming across people like you only now. And it's like there's so many incredible companies and people out there that are helping young people. It blows my mind that considering the world I'm in, I'm only just coming across you. So like how do
Yeah.
random kids who aren't even looking come across you or like these other companies? So you run a company called Purposeful. And
Yes.
I think obviously it's in the name what you do, but you help kids find their purpose or like, figure out, point them in a direction, give them some framework, some guidance. Obviously, a huge thing I talk about on this podcast, that word always comes up. So we're going to go into, I guess, your frameworks, what you see works with kids, how they can help get to that point. But before I do, I'd love to know what you did after high school, specifically, like what was going on in your head? Did you have any pressures? And we'll go from there.
Yeah. So my journey starts probably a little bit earlier than that, I guess in year 10 or 11, when I was at a academic school. I was a total nerd, and I still am. I loved learning, and I was in an environment where everyone was chasing after really high ATARs, and so I remember at that point though that I didn't actually know what I wanted to do, and I was around all these uber successful young people that had all these super cool ambitions and passions that they were talking about, and I didn't have one. Like I didn't have a passion, and it was the most frustrating thing because obviously at that time in your life you're asked every other second of the day, like, what do you want to do when you graduate? And for me, that answer, I sort of started to make up an answer because I just wanted to get people off my back. And I'd tell them, oh, well, like, I'm going to be a lawyer and travel the world and work for the United Nations. And they'd say, that's great. You'll be really good at that. And that was where the conversation ended, right? But
I
I
actually
wish it,
just did a video. I don't think I posted it yet, but one of the lines I said was exactly that. I said, I wonder how many people have chosen a career
yeah.
just to please the answer, what are you doing? To have an acceptable answer in the view of society to what are you doing?
Yeah, because it's so much stress as well to then have to justify being lost and not knowing.
Mm.
And I certainly found that. And even though no one pressured me to do that or to give that answer, it just made that process so much easier. Um, I think if you'd asked me why, though, which I wish that someone had at that point, I would have said, well, I want to make a difference. I'm not good at science or math, so I can't be a doctor and engineer, so I'm going to be a lawyer. And like that was my entire career decision making process. And I think a lot of young people go through a really similar thing. So when I graduated, I finished with this really high ATAR, 99.9 or something crazy like that. And
Wow.
on paper, it looked amazing. Like I ticked all the boxes that the traditional education system sort of asked of me. But on the flip side of that, I was completely lost. And year 11 and 12 had completely burnt me out. In my first year out of school, instead of, having fun and meeting people and traveling and doing all those things that everybody kind of looks forward to, I was at home most of the time. I was super sick and really just physically and emotionally exhausted from school. And it made me feel one that I didn't have any direction. Like here I was with all of this success, but I had no idea where to take that and how to work any of those things out. Like how do I figure out what I want to do? Why haven't I done that yet? Why am I the only one that's feeling this way? Even though now I know that the odds are that every other young person is going through that same process, but we just weren't talking about it.
Mm.
And so
And
that
by
was
just to
my journey.
clarify, the other people going through the process, they're the people you said earlier who are uber successful and
Yes,
high achievers, because that's how you
yes,
perceive them. But they're probably just as lost as you. And I think that's
yes.
an important point. Like we're always comparing, oh, everyone's getting high ATARs and high stuff. Most people that get a high ATAR are probably similar to you. They sacrificed a lot to get there and are
Yeah,
probably are very burnt out because that's not an easy
yeah.
achievement.
Yeah, and I saw it in a lot of my friends because they maybe were burnt out, but not in the same way I was, and so they just rushed into the next step, which for most of them was to go to uni and get a degree. But because I was kind of not super well, it meant that I was forced to pause and take a moment, or like 6 months really, to actually get to know myself, and that was something that I was kind of forced to do at the time, but it was by far the most impactful thing that's ever happened to me because it forced me in that moment to really like think about what does success actually look like to me? You know, is it this next step that everyone else is chasing after? No, I don't think it is. I don't think that I want to, you know, put my head down for another 3 years at uni, get really good grades, do really well on paper, and still have no clue.
Mm.
So,
And
yeah,
3 years of debt and
yeah,
3 years of opportunity costs. Like, what could you have been doing in those 3 years?
yeah,
That's what I always like. People always go, oh, no, I learned a little bit in this. I learned a bit about life skills and some stuff in uni. I'm like, but it cost you $40,000 in 3 years to learn that.
yeah,
You could have
yeah,
traveled Europe for 6 months and learned that.
yeah,
Like, that's not a justifiable way. And I totally get, don't dwell on, like, don't be full of regret. But when we're talking about advice to younger people, don't tell them, I actually learned some good stuff, and it was, even though I don't use my degree, um, it's frustrating to me because it's such 3 years in your, like, early 20s, and like $40,000 or whatever it is that could have been you could have been spent 3 years trying to figure out what you want to do. You could have traveled, seen new
yeah.
cultures, met new people. Like, there's so much. That's why I'm, get fired up about the gap year.
And the thing is that no young person would spend $40,000 so casually on anything else.
I know. It's
Like,
like I'm trying to sell this gap year for $1,000, and
yeah,
I give him. I honestly, and I probably can't say this. I give him more. I definitely give him more social events in a university. I give him one social event a week, pub crawls, hikes, all this stuff. We give him access to like some of the top mentors around the world, influencers with like 10 million followers and like huge, crazy qualifications. It's all included in the program. It's just $1,000, and then they'll balk at that. But then 20 grand for a year doing a business degree. It's like,
yeah,
no,
yeah. And
sorry.
no, it's okay. I totally agree. I'm on board. I think that the problem with that is, though, that young people don't see themselves as being the customer in that equation, and so they just sign up for 4 units in your first semester when really, like, you have no idea what you're doing. And there's nothing wrong with taking that exploratory kind of approach and testing things out, but the uni is just one way that you can do that. And I think for me, after I sort of like had gotten a bit back on my feet again, I fell into this realm of entrepreneurship. And back then, like, this is only 3 or 4 years ago, but it wasn't a thing. It still was something that people were like, what does that mean? Like, an entrepreneur, how does that work? It was certainly not something that I looked up to being, or a job that I'd been exposed to in high school. Whereas now, when I'm working with schools, so many of them want to be entrepreneurs because there's so much exposure.
Mm.
But back then that wasn't the case. So, but it made me think about my career in a really different way, because I realized that instead of just choosing a career or a course off the shelf from a uni or TAFE guide, I could create my own. I could create my own job around a problem that I cared about, or something that I was passionate about. That was mind-blowing for me. I'd never thought about using my experiences in that way, and I've sort
Sorry,
of been on that path ever
at
since.
what age did you have this realization?
That was at 18.
The
In my first year.
entrepreneurship realization, that was 18.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I mean, so it was after, as you finished high school, really.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
that's where it's like, why aren't we taught that in school? Shouldn't we be taught that from day dot, that you can, if you want to, you don't have to,
Mm.
but you can find a problem that you're passionate about and then create a job around something that you're passionate about, and entrepreneurship. Like, it just
Yeah.
seems, I get, like, it wasn't as talked about back then, but I think it should be included into
Mm.
the curriculum. So the sponsor of this episode is Student Edge, who we both work with, and they introduced me to you, which is awesome. So obviously we're going to be talking about purposefulness and a lot of what you do in your program. But for any listeners, you do actually unpack a lot of this in detail on Student Edge Plus, which is the educational platform they're building out, which teaches practical life skills. So anyone who listened to Taj, one of the recent episodes, he's also on the Student Edge Plus. So guys, definitely check it out. But what is involved in like that workshop?
Yeah, we have a bunch of crash courses on there to figuring out your future, and on topics that you wouldn't think you could make practical, like how to design your dream gap year, how to make a difference in your career, how to create your own way or your own career path. We've made all of that really practical and also fun. Like, that's my mission really as well, is that so many of us have so much dread and anxiety and overwhelm about the conversation of the future. So our mission with those courses was really to make them fun and to be an actually enjoyable process. And there's so much love and passion that got poured into them. So I would love for you to check them out, and hear also a bunch of stories of young people who are going through that exact process. Like, it's not me teaching, it's the young people that have that lived experience and maybe just a few steps of ahead of where you are, that are sharing their stories and what they've learned.
But yeah, guys, if you enjoy this episode, if you make it to the end, definitely check out Student Edge Plus with all the stuff they're offering.
Yeah, and especially for young people, that if you do well at school, then there's this perception, and particularly from, my parents and just society, I think in general, that it is a risky path, right? But in my opinion, the risky path is just doing what everyone else is doing.
Yeah, I agree.
And especially if you're someone that is high achieving or works hard, right, that has that work ethic, then you have the best chance of being successful at that path, if anything. So I think a lot of young people that are stuck on a lot of those traditional paths really should consider the huge opportunity that's out there in startups and in entrepreneurship in general, because you've got the skills to do it. Like, you've got the drive. If anyone can do it, it's you. When it's you that's on the line, right? When it's your passion or your problem that is at stake, you'll learn whatever you need to learn. So I did like a first year commerce unit on accounting, and I hated it. Like, I still to this day cannot tell you anything that I learned from that unit. But now it's absolutely critical to making my business succeed. So you bet that I've gone and learned how to do that. So that's really what I think the power of purpose in this whole equation has, is that it brings relevance to everything that you're doing. It's like this super powerful filter that can help you to work out what you actually need to learn and become better at. And it stops you from seeing your skill set in such a fixed way. Like, I love this idea. One of my facilitators was talking about it the other day, that, I'm not good at math yet. And making sure that you don't, see that as something that's finite. You can actually build any skill set nowadays. And we've got so many awesome learning experiences at our fingertips that you can build your own degree, right? That is totally purposeful to your goals and what you want to do.
Yeah, well, I mean, whether you think you can or whether you think you can't, you're right. And a lot of kids in school think they can't. They think they can't be an entrepreneur. They think they can't be good at math. I said that. I still say I'm bad at math. And but again, if I needed math to do whatever I wanted to do, I'm sure I would get good at it. And that's actually another interesting point. Dr. Margita Awada, I had her on the podcast. She's written a book analyzing Australia's school system, and she talks about like I think it was called like real life learning or something. It's where you make a skill they have to learn tangible to their life, and therefore kids are far more likely to want to learn it. The easiest example was, rather than saying here's a circle, cut it into quarters. This is a quarter, because that's no relevance. Turn it into pizza. Get them excited about what flavor pizza do you want. Okay, we're going to cut it into 4. Who wants the biggest piece? I do. Okay, you 4 get the biggest piece. This means you get 1 quarter each. Now it's practical to them. And you can apply this all the way up until doctorates. You can apply this practical learning. And exactly as you say, I mean, this is the whole growth and fixed mindset, what you just said. If you think you can't, then you probably can't. But just know that you can. And if you have that belief and you realize, you know what, I can improve. It might take me a while, but I can be good at the skill. I can improve. That alone is such an important thing that kids should be, adopting. And It's not that hard. It's not that hard to understand. It's not that hard to teach as well. Again, I teach all the stuff in the podcast and empower you and everything. But yeah, I know. Great point. Sorry.
No, all good.
But so purpose. You kind of mentioned this word purpose. Obviously, your company is called Purposeful. For you, you went into doing, and I swear on my life, every single guest has the same story as you. They finished high school, they felt pressure to do something, they chose something like lawyer, which is the hands down. Lawyer, business, and psychology are the 3 most common degrees I get that people just kind of choose when they're not actually sure. They pay a lot of money, a lot of time, just to then go realize, oh, I don't want to do this. And so how did you kind of mentioned it, but how do you help people find their purpose? So for listeners right now, what is purpose and how do we find this thing?
Yeah, I think we have an interesting view on purpose that's really important to understand. I don't actually say, like, I'm going to help you find your purpose. And I
Yeah.
don't talk about it necessarily in that way, because I think a lot of us have this idea that your purpose or your passion or, that dream job is just out there waiting for you to find it, or
Like,
waiting for it to like fall on your head, right? Like,
it's like the one, like a soulmate.
yes, 100%. It is exactly like that. I blame Hollywood for why we all think this. But the reality is that's just not true. And I don't like that mindset, because it makes us really passive. It just sort of makes us sit around and go, oh, like my purpose will find me when it's supposed to. It doesn't work like that. Rarely. I've rarely met someone who's found their purpose by watching Netflix or like sitting in their bedroom. Finding purpose is a really active thing. And I like to think about it in terms of, if you wanted a 6-pack of abs, right, which deep down, most of us want that to some extent, I think,
Yeah.
you wouldn't go to the gym for one day and then come home and be like, oh, do I have abs yet? Like, and check to see, because you know that it's a long-term pursuit, that even if you do something a little bit every day, you're going to get much closer to achieving that goal, unless, compared to if you just stayed still. And the same goes for figuring out yourself and reconnecting with who you are, because I think in school the problem is a lot of us get kind of pushed away from who we are. We get taught to conform instead of to get to know our authentic selves. And so when it comes to actually figuring out what fills you with purpose, what are the things that give you that energy and that drive and momentum? And that can come from a good place, like something that really lights you up and gets you excited. But it can also come from a place of like deep frustration and pain that you might have experienced too. There's this quote from Melinda Gates, I think, about how purpose is the thing that brings this focus and urgency to your life. And I love that, because it's not finite. It can change. What fills you with purpose today might be different in a few years, and that's okay. But in order to be in touch with that, you have to take that 6-pack ab approach to learning about yourself. You've got to do something every day, whether that's just 10 minutes of journaling or 10 minutes of something that's going to help you to reconnect with who you are.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I've been saying this quite a lot recently, is like, I honestly believe that once we finish school, we have to actually spend the next few years unlearning everything we've been taught, which that's how much I think the school system is failing us. I genuinely think that when we graduate school, we now have to learn to unlearn to conform, to raise our hand to go to the toilet, to, be independent, to focus on our own marks as opposed to everyone else's, and don't work as a team or as a group. It's really a solo mindset. And as I'm sure we both know, that's not how the world works. You need to work as a team, bounce off each other's strengths and weaknesses. And that's the real world. So yeah, I agree. I don't think purpose is, what even is purpose? It's such a meh word. It's like, it's not tangible, and does it even exist?
Yeah.
But so I think I like the approach of just, trying to find something that just aligns with you more. It's something that you enjoy doing. It's almost as simple as that. Like, what is something you enjoy doing? How can you make money doing that and help solve a problem? So, is this kind of, what are the first things you teach at your workshops to young people? Is it kind of understanding what purpose is? Is it to chase it? Like, I know you've got frameworks and stuff, which we're going to unpack, which I'm excited about, because it does feel, I want to make this episode very practical. I don't want to just, everyone knows about this purpose thing, but how do we find it? Like, what are the next steps we can take now?
Yeah, totally. That was my frustration too, because we've all been to like an inspirational talk or listened to an episode, and we're like, oh my God, I've got so much momentum and excitement, but what do I do with that? So we try and make it really practical and actually things that you can take away immediately, right? And one of the core topics that I think is really critical that helps you to figure out purpose for yourself is around your values. And really, your values are something that we all have, right? We all have them, whether we're aware of them or not. And we get them often from our family, from our society, from the internet sometimes. But they're so important because they determine how we behave and what we do. They determine our priorities and our actions. And one of the first things that really helped me in those times where I was coming up with against huge decisions to make and really critical choices for my future, and going like, which one of these things is right for me? How do I determine the right path? We get a lot of young people, I would say that's the number one question that we get asked, is how do I figure out the right something?
Can I just say on that comment, because sorry, I like to interrupt when I hear a good point and unpack it. The right path, I think that language is so bad. Like, here's the answer. There is no right path when you're 18 years old. you're not, I mean, why would you even want a right path? You want to just choose something and that's it. You're on the same pathway for the rest of your life. I think the right
Yeah,
pathway is to first of all understand there is no pathway
yeah,
and to get out there and explore and try as many
yes.
things as possible. And as a result, by doing that, you're eventually going to find a pathway that suits you.
Yeah. Yeah, 100%. And you're in the driver's seat of your future, right? Like people talk about, everything happens for a reason, but I think you get to choose the reason,
Yeah,
just
yeah,
like you said, like, and things don't, as soon as you realize that life doesn't just happen to you, like you can kind of go out and happen to it. That's so critical to understand. And yeah, values are a big part of that process, as well as vision, which I can chat about too. With values in particular, I think it's really important when you're 18 or 19 in particular, because you're coming up against all these choices, right? And in school, the one subject we really learn nothing about other than ourselves is decision making. Like, how do we
mm,
actually make choices that are right for us? And as much as I don't think there is a right path for everybody, I think there's a path that feels right. And that comes down to your values. Is this aligned with me, like really, in what I believe? Um, a lot of people get confused because when you might have done it before, you get like a long list of values and you've got to go through and just like circle the ones that jump out to you. But you might think, oh, I value love, like I value friendship, but
right.
I value all of these things. So how do
Yeah,
I
yeah,
decide which one
yeah.
is for me? But it's a priorities sort of framework, right? It's about going, these are the ones that resonate with me the most right now. It doesn't mean I don't value friendship, but it means that,
Mm,
my well-being is more important than that to me right now. The why behind that value is greater for me today. And so my values are, well, you can probably guess, one is purposefulness, being
shocker.
purposeful. But that's not like ironic. Like that was literally on purpose, because my value came from doing work and
Mm.
experiences that fulfill me. So purpose was really key there.
Well, and you had the 3 years where you weren't aligned, so you could feel
Yeah,
that disconnect. So you went from not being aligned to having alignment, and you're probably going, "Oh my God, look at the
yeah,
difference in my life. I'm
yeah,
happier. I'm with people I enjoy. I'm solving a problem. I'm impacting lives.
yeah.
This is clearly something that I value."
Yeah, and it's the most simple thing that we can do to, I think, create that fulfillment and purpose for ourselves is being aware of what our values are and then putting them into practice. And a lot of people might say, I have the value of purpose, or another one for me is authenticity, but then there's someone that gossips all the time with their
Yeah,
friends,
right.
and that might make them feel really bad. Like, you might not enjoy that, but you're doing it. And the reason why there's that conflict is because it goes against your values. So when we're feeling lost or like really stuck or just unmotivated or unfulfilled, often that's because we're in a situation that just doesn't align with our values. And that's been a really important framework for me, because for example, more recently, we had this huge opportunity in my company for a lot of funding that would have absolutely been game changing. Like, without a doubt, it would have been transformative for the business. But for a couple of reasons, it wasn't the right opportunity. It didn't align with my values. And on paper, everybody would have kind of looked at me and gone, "You're crazy. Like, why would you turn that down?" But it actually went against my values. And so that
Mm,
was a really difficult decision to make. But I think the important thing to understand is that once you have your values, even though you might know them and you might know what the right thing to do with them is, it's really difficult to execute sometimes. And
yeah,
that's
for
why
sure.
people avoid it. So,
Well, like, I mean, another example similar to you, because I've also toyed with the idea of like, with this gap year program, there's a lot of upfront fees and costs, and I'm investing all of my own money, which I don't even have that much regardless, because I mean, I haven't made a hell of a lot of money doing the podcast yet. But I have told people, have been like, "Oh, have you looked at getting investment? Have you looked at getting funding or something?" And I'm
mm,
like, "Yeah, but one of my biggest values that I really preach, if not one of the biggest values I preach, is like focusing on enjoying the journey and the adventure. And you'll never be satisfied when you get to the prize. Whatever your dream is, whatever you want to achieve. If you want to be a doctor, you finally achieve a doctor, and now you want to be a surgeon, and whatever it is. And so if you can focus on enjoying the journey, that is a really big value I preach. And so I'm like, well, even though it is a struggle to get this money and to invest and there's big risks involved, I'm still enjoying the journey. And I feel like that is a strong value of mine. And then also, I don't want
Yeah.
anyone to have control of the stuff I'm doing. So, like, I don't want someone, a government, funding, and they're like, oh, you can't do parties, you can't do pub crawls. It's like, nah,
Yeah.
screw that.
Yeah, exactly. And uh, that's funny. I've definitely come up against that a lot lately, I think. But you've got to be in it for the long term, the long run,
That's the
right?
word, isn't it? Long term. That's
Yes,
the word.
because so many young people are, that's the great thing about being young, right, is it's everything in the here and now. And it, as you get a little bit older, like even just at my age, like at 22 compared to when I was 19, all those experiences, you're experiencing everything for the first time. So it's super emotional and visceral and intense and exciting and sad and scary all at once. As you get a bit more perspective from that, you can kind of like put things in balance more. But one thing that, these choices that you do make right now, actually, this is the most formative time of your life. And that's not, I'm not saying that to scare people, but it means that, the people that you surround yourself with now, do they align with what you believe? Like, do they align with your values? If they don't, then they're helping to shape your path into something that maybe you don't want it to be in future too. So those little choices that you make, whether it's who you hang out with, whether you choose to spend your time studying, like for uni, or learning something that you really care about, that's really critical. Those little decisions will have a big effect in the future if you're not careful about making sure they do align with what you believe.
That's it. And I think you really have to prioritize yourself, and it's actually a lot of work. Like, life isn't just going to magically work out for you. You have to actually put in effort. And exactly, I think if you don't put in effort, you're doing the opposite. Good habits compounded over time is how you achieve a goal. Bad
Mm,
habits is equally important. If you read Atomic Habits by James Clear, he talks about setting up good habits, but he also talks about how important it is to remove your bad habits. Because the same
yeah.
way a habit can change your whole life, a bad habit can ruin your entire life.
Mm,
And a great example. I'll give you a great example of a bad habit that I constantly see now that I'm like 5 years out of high school. In high school and like 18, 19, people would start smoking at parties.
mm,
And because they knew smoking was bad, and they'd be like, I just have it when I'm drunk. I just really want it when I'm drunk. That's like the key word they'd say, right? And that's fine. That's fine. But now, 5 years later, they're addicted to smoking because they go
yep.
to a party once a week, and that added up, and that habit went up and up and up. And
Yeah.
now they want a cigarette all the time. And so,
Yes.
exactly what you're saying, focus on the small things, because even though the big things are really fun and
Mm.
sexy to dream about, the actions happen in the small things, don't they?
Yeah, and we wait, I think, often until everything's perfect before we take any kind of action towards our goals, and that's definitely the approach I had, because in school, again, right, you're taught to have the right answer, but be prepared, do your research before you get started. But if I've learned anything from running my own business with no real business experience before that, it's that you will learn. Like, you have no choice, you have to learn,
Yeah,
and it's the most fun and kind of immersive way to learn by doing it in that way.
I agree. I've learned so much in the past 5 years, and you're exactly right. And this won't be relevant to everyone, but like, when you're in business and the only option is to do it, you have to do it.
Yeah,
There's a story I've shared a few times now of Jesse, who was 17, and he was the youngest person to ever sail the world. And
yeah,
Brent, my mentor, who runs Empower You, he actually interviewed him for a book a long time ago, and he said, "How come you were able to succeed at this when other people didn't?" And he said, "You know what? I actually gave up a lot. A lot of times I gave up, but the thing is, there was no land for 3 weeks." And so
mm,
I'd give up, I'd start hitting the land. Suddenly I start feeling better. Dolphins would jump out of the water, the sun would shine, and I'm back on.
mm,
The reason I was able to achieve this was because I gave myself no exits. And in business, you have no exits. The only exit you have is to just give up on the business. And so by having no exits, you just have to do it. You have
yeah,
to do it.
yeah,
And there's been same. I have had to learn accounting. If
yeah,
you asked me to study accounting or learn it, I would have hated that so much. I'm so bad with numbers, but because I have my own business and in order to run it, I have to learn a level of accounting. I've had to learn it,
yeah.
and so that's why I'm a big advocate of starting a micro business when you're young. Even if you don't want to be an entrepreneur, you're going to learn so much and you're going to gain so many skills
Mm-hmm.
that are going to transfer over into your career.
Yeah, and I honestly think that applies to any goal that you have, right? It doesn't just have to be about business. Um, I've heard that analogy before about like burning the boats, like making sure that, yeah, there isn't an escape route for you achieving your goal. And some strategies that I've like put in place myself to manage that. So say you've got this seemingly like crazy, big, hairy, audacious goal, right, that is so far from where you are now. You just have no idea how you're going to get there. I think about that in terms of like headlights on a dark road, and
Right.
you can see vaguely like where you're headed, like the horizon, but you can't see it with clarity and full perspective and like all the details. But you can only see really like 2 or 3 steps in front of you at a time. And so anyone that's trying to chase after something big that seems out of your reach, really the only way to go about doing that is taking those first 3 steps. And when you get to that 3rd step, it's going to show you the next 3 steps, and then so on, until you eventually get there. And that vision that you have that, maybe is just a dream or an idea, will be crystal clear. And I think that no matter what your goal is, like that mindset still applies. When I think about how can you actually, burn the boats, I guess, figuratively, for yourself in your life, one of the strategies I had when I first started my business, this was at the start of last year, in COVID, right? So I just finished uni and then COVID hit, like the 2 weeks into me being full-time on my business. So suddenly like that kind of forced a lot of boats to be burned because I had no choice but
Oh
to.
man, isn't COVID the great example? Like
Yes.
the amount of people I know, like me, it burnt a perfect example. Me, I was running my video marketing agency and I had the podcast at the time. And then I lost all my clients to my video marketing agency within like 3 weeks of COVID hitting. And I went, this sucks. It hurt a lot for the first few weeks, but long term, I was like, I actually kind of wanted to get rid of them for a long time anyway, but I never would have because I had expenses to pay for.
Yes.
And then because of COVID, I started TikTok, and TikTok has exploded my business. It's how everyone kind of discovers my podcast and knows me from. And so, yeah, I had the same sort of thing where I had this, I guess, metaphorically, the bridges had to be burned, as in my clients lost. And yeah, I mean, that's where you can lean into stuff that happens, bad stuff that happens. And you can almost like a slingshot, you go back to go forward.
Yep. And in terms of how you can do that practically, one thing that was great for me was social media. So I'd like post about programs and things that were happening that I hadn't built yet. But people were signing up for them. And so I was like, I have to build this thing because it's out there and people want it. And similarly, I'd lock in meetings with people or like a coffee chat with someone for 3 weeks ahead of time that I knew that I needed to get this pitch sorted for, or like this proposal, or I needed to learn something before I had that meeting. And so it kind of helped me to create, what school does, but school does it in a very average way. But for myself and my goals, like it helped me to create this process that would incentivize me in the short term, because I think it's really glamorous, like the idea of working for yourself. And, I keep seeing that like meme going around at the moment of like, you don't want to work a 9 to 5, like, well, running your own business at 24/7. Like, that's certainly the case. So you've got to also, as much as purpose is important and passion behind what you do, you've got to have those support systems that can actually help you to achieve your goals.
100%. I mean, support systems is everything, because when you fall, that's what they're there for, and you will fall. That's what life is, a roller coaster. Like you are going to have ups and downs. But yeah, I think that it's super, super important that people focus on finding their purpose. And look, actually, we're not using that word finding your purpose because it doesn't really exist, but just figuring out who you are and your values. You mentioned like if you force yourself to choose like your 3 strongest values. I know family and friends and relationships is probably everyone's values, right? But if you had to pick 3 out of like your top 20, what are those 3? And try lean into those. What other? I know you've got some other frameworks and stuff. What other stuff do you talk about when it comes to helping achieve this? Actually, sorry, I forgot a thought. Before we move on to that, I did want to say, going back to the whole getting pulled, like you put yourself out on social media to hold yourself accountable to like people, right? I've heard that strategy before. This happened to me with my very first webinar or my information night for the gap year, which was like 3 weeks ago. I accidentally had booked one in and I forgot. It was just like a test, and I had done no marketing for it. And I had 16 people who had registered just through like my link through TikTok and stuff. And I was like, oh crap, 16 people. And I know like usually I only have like 30 or 40% show up. So I was like, 16 people, this is not enough. This is not worth my time having like 5 people on, because might not make any sales. But then I was like, you know what? Let's just do it anyway. Let's just do it. I'll use it to practice run. I made 3 sales off the back of it, and it gave me so much confidence. And then I launched the program, and it's been going, we've been making more sales since then. But I was just like, oh man, I was really glad I got put in that situation.
Yeah, it's a huge thing to unlearn after high school is perfectionism.
Mm.
Like, get rid of it. And I'm still battling with that as a, born and bred perfectionist myself. But it's the only way to get stuff done. Like, it is truly, I did a similar thing a few weeks ago where we had this idea, right? This boot camp. And I think with that, at that point, it was still just an idea. Like, a big mindset and sort of approach in the startup scene is to, fail fast and to test things and figure out how could you kill this idea, right? Which is kind of counterintuitive, but what things are potentially going to break this idea in a few weeks? Figure those things out as soon as you can so you can work
Yeah.
to solve them. And so we did a similar thing with this workshop that we launched, and it was not ready, but I was confident that we had value to give and that we were going to be able to create an awesome space for people to actually be able to express themselves and learn more about who they were. So we ran with it, and they've then informed exactly what the solution should look like. Like, they've helped us to build what they need.
It's the whole like MVP, right? Minimum viable product, which is the opposite of perfectionist. Like, what is the
Yeah,
minimum viable product you can create
yeah,
to test it to the market?
yeah,
And you're right, school really conditions you to be a perfectionist. The people who get the highest ATAR were perfectionists. They had to get when they're writing the essays, they had to hit every key point. That is a bad way. I mean, it depends on what you want to do. I think majority of people, that perfectionist mindset is only going to cause grief and stress and really weigh on you. Maybe if you're like a coder and you need to get every word right, or like a programmer, sure. But for most people, it can be really counterintuitive.
yeah,
And I think you're right. We do have to unlearn that. And
mm,
I know a great example I love talking about is my mate, had him on the podcast, Dale. He's a musician. Pace Randolph is his stage name. He created music for a long time, but he never released it because it wasn't good enough. And he's like, I wanted that one song to launch and it changes my career. And that never happens. And so what he did is he created the song every day and posted it on TikTok. And that changed his entire mindset.
yeah. Yeah, especially when you launch something or you put anything out there, right? Anything about yourself, like whether it's your music or your work or something that you're really proud of, you kind of expect like everyone's watching you, everyone's paying attention, everyone cares so much. But the reality is usually when you do that, you'll hear crickets to begin with. Like, the whole world is not watching you really yet. So I really love that approach of taking those baby steps to achieving your goals. And also this idea that we talk about in startups but also applies for your life is building in public. Like, actually don't wait until the finished product is ready. Don't wait until you're amazing or like you're really, really fit and you can run 10Ks. Like, do that with other people around you, because then they can actually help you. Whereas if you kind of build behind closed doors and work at achieving your goals on your own, then it's a team effort. Like you said, every one person that's changed the world did it with like 100 people behind them, backing them and supporting them
Yeah.
in some way.
Whether you know who they are or not, they did have people
Yes.
behind them. Martin Luther
Yes.
King, he had people behind him. You might not know who their names are,
Yeah.
but he had his group of people that were supporting him. Anyone who has changed the world has. Like, having people is so important. Sorry.
Yeah, and no, it's okay. Yeah, and not. I think we have this perception though that you kind of have to do it alone. Like, if you ask for help, then that's a sign of weakness, or like you're not perfect, and it is, because you're not perfect, and you need other people to complement your strengths. And that was a big lesson for me in my journey, was that as soon as I hired people, it transformed everything. Like, and not just because I had 4 other people working on what I was doing, but just because it held me accountable to them. It became this tangible thing. It wasn't just me alone in my room, like hustling away.
Well, that's why another one of my companies, that I guess not my company, but a company I help run, is the 5:30 Club. We meet at a cafe at 5:30 every morning, and we've got about 25 cafes around Australia, of a few hundred people who do it every morning. And the reason it works so well is you wake up and there's people there to hold you accountable, and they're not actually going to hold you accountable. They're not going to be like, hey, where were you, why didn't you come? But it's just like this environment where it's like, I know people are going to be there. I know I told them yesterday I'd be there tomorrow morning. It makes it so much easier. I tried waking up at 6 a.m. and I'd always phase out. With a 5:30 Club, because there's cool people there, I just always do it. I just always get there. And it comes up every episode, the importance of having people around you.
Yeah, and ones that are aligned. I think another thing that I find a lot of people, I want to speak to the people that have something that they want to do, like maybe they actually kind of have figured out that purpose for themselves already, then it becomes the hard part of actually bringing it to life and acting
Yeah.
on it. And so many people that we meet and talk to through Purposeful have that thing, and for whatever reason, like the people around them or their support systems just don't support it. So often it's your parents, right? Like they don't understand. In my own story, I wanted to be an entrepreneur suddenly, and my parents are like, "What are you doing? Like you've got this secure pathway." For my parents' generation, it's like all about job security and having that stability, and I had that, and they're like, "Are you crazy? Like, why are you leaving that behind potentially to run your own business that you don't know how it's going to make money yet? Like, there's no certainty in that at all." So a lot of people kind of go through that process to different degrees of how do I navigate what my parents expect or what society expects and wants for me versus what I actually know that I need to do. I spent a lot of time in that process sort of like arguing with people and kind of trying to fight and justify why what I was doing is important. I wish, though, that I'd spent more of that energy instead of like in that draining process of like conflict with people in actually building what I wanted to do, in actually taking those steps towards, if you want to be a musician, if you want to be in finance and your parents want you to be an engineer, like doing something that demonstrated proof of, your drive, your motivation, and also that you can do it, like that there is an option there.
What's the thing
Whereas
about
most of my
parents? Like, because I deal with this all the time, and as I'm sure you do, parents pressuring their kids to go down a pathway that they want, a pathway that often they may have laid out for them before they're even born, which is just impossible in the modern day world with careers changing and the world changing. But, and like kids, and it's so hard for me because my parents have been so supportive. But when kids ask me, look, Byron, my parents want me to be a lawyer. I don't want to be a lawyer. I've been listening to your podcast. I know I just want to I want to take advice. I want to travel. I want to do stuff. And I'm like, yes, yes, but my parents won't let me. And I'm like, what do you mean? What do you mean they won't let you? I just can't even comprehend that. Like, what do you mean your parents won't let you enjoy your life? Well, they want to put you into something, make you miserable because you don't want to do that. And I think something that's important is you're better off to make your parents disappointed in you for a year or two than resent them for your entire life. Because if you go down a certain career pathway and then you do that, and now you're a lawyer or whatever it is that you didn't want to do, 25 years later, you might have a disconnect with your parents. And that could be because subconsciously you're still in something you're doing that you hate because of them, and you're not living the life you wanted to live. And I was speaking about this the other day, and we're like, I do know people who do struggle, they do have a bit of that disconnect with their parents. That could be one of the reasons. It might not be, but it might be, I just don't connect with my parents as well as other people do. And so I think you are better off to have your parents maybe disappointed in you for a year or two. And obviously you start your business. When you're successful, everyone says they supported you and they're like, I'm so proud of them. And so just, prove them wrong.
Definitely. And I mean, I think you have to empathize too. And I do empathize with people in that situation that, like, you touched on it then, the goal is the same, right? Most of the time, your parents don't want you to be unhappy.
Of course.
They don't want you to be unsuccessful. So you have the same goal. The problem is that you have a different opinion of how you can achieve that. So I often talk about, mapping out what are the assumptions, like have that conversation with them, write it down on paper, like what are the things that they're believing about this path for you that's stopping them from supporting you in it. And it might be like, you're not going to make money, you're not going to have any stability or security, and then actually work to disprove those one by one, validate, test those assumptions that they have. And so one thing that really helped in my journey was moving out and making that work. I didn't have the financial stability or the money behind me. I just hustled my way through hospitality jobs to get, in this really like average kind of setup to begin with. But it meant that I could choose like who I wanted to surround myself with most, right? It didn't mean that those issues went away, like that difference of opinion went away. It was just that there was perspective, like I could have perspective. And I see a lot of people that, if you're going home every single day and that's the issue that you're confronting, like it's so consuming and it's so difficult to build that perspective and distance yourself from it. But any way that you can physically distance yourself from it, and I don't mean run away, like don't mean run away from the problem, but to help you to build more perspective is really important.
Sure, and move countries, get a fresh reset if you want. Go live somewhere else. Go, oh, but Byron, I don't have any money. Then get a job. Then go backpack. Then live in hostels for a bit. Like, stop making excuses. Like, if you listen to this podcast, and sorry, none of my podcast listeners ever say that. It's just people on TikTok who say that. But if you've got access to TikTok, then it means you've got access to the internet, and you're probably in a level of privilege compared to a lot of other people. So just stop making excuses. But also, I did want to say, you said, prove your parents wrong. Go do all that. I do think even if you fail, don't let your parents be like, see, I told you. Because here's the thing, you are gonna fail. You might start a business and it might fail, and your parents will be like, I told you, you should have been a lawyer. It's like, or whatever it is. Keep in mind, university is always going to be there. It is secure, it is safe. You can always go and study that degree, depending on the degree. But most degrees, you can always go study it. And so take the risk now, start whatever you want to do. And even if you fail, you can go do that degree if you want to, or whatever it is you need. But look, just really listen to yourself. I do think if you are in that level with your parents where they just are forcing you to do something, yeah, move out. And as you said, if you don't have any money, then get a job, figure it out. Try to think, if I had to move out, how would I do it?
Yeah.
Because there are
Burn
ways
the
to do
boats.
it. Yeah. Oh, there you go. It was full circle, haven't we? We've gone full circle back to
We
one of our
didn't
original
plan
points.
that.
Yeah, yeah. But awesome. I'm just looking at time. Yeah, 46 minutes. Yeah, great. Look, Elizabeth, this has been really cool. Great conversation about purpose and other things. Before we wrap up, I always ask each guest one final question, and that is, what advice would you give the younger generation, like an 18-year-old? And it could be unrelated to this conversation.
I was prepared for this one.
Yeah, I'm getting that
Actually,
quite a bit now. A lot of people are like, they listen to the show and they're like, I'm ready for it.
I never have it. People always ask me, so I don't have an answer. I'm always kicking myself. But my answer, I think, the idea that helps me the most, right, in every area of my life, is just this idea that life is short, right? Life is finite, and it's cliche as anything, but it's critical, because a lot of young people, we have this sense that like time is endless, like we have forever on this planet to do what we want. And sure, when you're young, you've got a greater chance at living longer than other people, but none of that is guaranteed and none of that is certain. That's like the biggest myth. And I don't use that to scare myself, and I don't say that to scare people either, but it's the thing that gives me that focus and urgency to my life. It makes me value what I'm doing, right, and value how I spend my time. And, knowing that I only have a certain amount of hours here to actually create a legacy for other people and to leave my mark, right? Everybody wants to make a difference. Everyone wants to do something that is worthwhile and to help other people and leave this world better than we found it. Like, I don't mean many people that don't want that,
Mm,
but don't waste your time in that process either, because right now when you're young is the best opportunity you have to take all of those risks, to do things that seem a bit crazy, because you're never going to have as much security as you do right now. Really, like, you've got you to depend on and you to look after. As you get older, for so many of us, that changes. So use your youth wisely and make every minute count.
love it. That was great. That was good. Your little word perfect scripted, was it? But no, that was really good. Thanks so much for coming on, Elizabeth. If anyone wants to get in contact with you, have a look at your programs, check out your website, like, where's the best place to go?
Hit me up on LinkedIn. I'm always keen for a chat, or our Instagram at purposeful.au.
Yep, and friendly reminder that you've done a section on Student Edge, where you, I guess, break down everything we spoke about here in much more detail. So if anyone wants to find out more, you spoke about your frameworks, but they're very visual. So if people want to check out your frameworks and actually go through the process, there's also a whole educational content on Student Edge Plus, which you guys have access to. They're the sponsor of this episode. But Elizabeth, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you so much for having me.